Hey guys, tonight we step back in time to one of the most formidable military machines in history, the Roman legion. Picture this: you're trudging down a dusty road under the relentless Mediterranean sun. Your leather sandals scrape against the gravel as you heft the weight of your shield, your armor clanking in rhythm with your footsteps. Around you, disciplined rows of fellow soldiers march in unison, banners fluttering in the breeze, their vibrant colors standing out against the brown and gray of the landscape. The sheer scale of it all is overwhelming. You glance to your left and see a centurion, his plumed helmet gleaming, barking orders with a voice that seems built to echo. The scent of sweat, iron, and the faint tang of campfire smoke clings to the air. The legion is moving, no, not just moving, but coursing like a living river of iron and willpower, pushing relentlessly toward the next battle. Of course, there's a good chance you probably won't survive this. After all, it's ancient Rome, no air conditioning, no soft beds, and definitely no Wi-Fi. But something keeps you going. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's duty, or maybe it's just that unspoken bond with the men on either side of you, your fellow legionaries who would fight and die to protect the Roman Empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes trace the outline of the ancient road ahead, weaving its way between fields of wheat and sparse groves of olive trees. You don't know exactly where you're going, none of the regular soldiers ever really know. All you have are orders from your centurion, passed down from the tribunes, passed down from the legate, and ultimately from the emperor himself. The destination isn't important. It's the act of moving forward, one step after another, that fills your thoughts. The Roman legion is an awe-inspiring force. At its height, the Roman army could field hundreds of thousands of troops, soldiers organized with near-perfect efficiency. You're part of something so vast, so well-oiled, that it almost seems to function without human input. The legion's discipline and structure are the true secret behind Rome's conquests, more so than any individual act of heroism. Your unit is one of the many, the ordinary infantrymen. Yet within the legion there's a whisper of something greater. The elite forces. You've heard tales around the campfires of those chosen to join the Praetorian Guard, Rome's most feared and revered soldiers. They're not just warriors, they're symbols of the emperor's might. Then there are the scouts and spies, the speculators and explorators, masters of stealth and information who blend into enemy territories like shadows. But for now, your concerns are more immediate: how to keep your armor from chafing and how to ignore the constant ache in your shoulders from carrying your gear. You listen as a few of the older soldiers swap stories about past campaigns, battles fought in far-off lands where even the sun seemed unfamiliar. One grizzled veteran recounts a skirmish where his cohort, outnumbered 3-1, held off barbarian invaders thanks to a cleverly constructed makeshift palisade. You half listen, pretending not to notice how his voice drops when he talks about the friends he lost. Your unit halts for a break, and you find a flat rock to sit on. Pulling out a crust of bread from your pack, you gnaw at it absent-mindedly, your mind wandering to home. You wonder if your family is safe, if they've heard the latest rumors of rebellion in the provinces. Yet, despite the hardship and uncertainty, there's a strange comfort in being part of this moving fortress. Like your fate is intertwined with something monumental. When the order to march comes again, you hoist your pack and fall into line, muscles protesting but disciplined enough not to falter. A newer recruit stumbles ahead of you, and you reach out instinctively to steady him. He nods his thanks, embarrassed. You can't help but crack a smile. Everyone's been the clumsy rookie at some point. As the sun dips lower, painting the sky with streaks of amber and rose, the rhythm of the march becomes almost hypnotic. Your mind drifts to tales of Roman glory, the victories over Carthage, the sacking of distant cities, and the treasures brought back to Rome. You wonder what it would be like to see the capital in all its grandeur, with marble temples and sprawling forums bustling with life. The thought brings a flicker of pride. Maybe after this campaign you'll be allowed to return to Rome. Maybe you'll finally see the Colosseum instead of just hearing about it from soldiers who once guarded its entrances. A sudden cheer breaks out up ahead. Someone has spotted the outline of a military camp. You're not there yet, but just knowing rest is on the horizon quickens your pace. As you move forward, your thoughts linger on the stories of Rome's most elite soldiers. You can't help but wonder what it takes to be one of them: strength, courage, or perhaps just the right amount of luck. Being a regular legionary has its own brutal rhythm, but being elite? That's a whole different kind of pressure, where failure means dishonor and success makes you a living legend. The sky deepens to violet, and as the chill of night begins to settle, you grip your spear a little tighter. You're not an elite soldier, not yet. But who knows? If you make it through this campaign, maybe your name will one day be spoken of around the campfires, just like those legends of the Praetorians. The camp comes into view just as the last sliver of sunlight disappears behind the hills. You're exhausted, but there's a flicker of satisfaction in making it through another day. The camp itself is a marvel of efficiency. No matter where the Legion travels, it constructs a temporary fortress every evening. Tents are arranged in perfect rows, surrounded by ditches and wooden palisades, while guard posts are already manned, eyes scanning the darkening horizon. Once inside, you finally let the tension drain from your shoulders. A few of the older soldiers are already starting small fires, their faces flickering in the soft glow. You drop your pack onto the ground with a satisfying thud and loosen the straps of your armor, feeling the cool night air on your sweat-dampened skin. Tonight's chatter is lighter. Someone has managed to snag a small jug of wine, passing it around with the kind of generosity that only comes after a hard day's march. You accept a swig, savoring the rough, acidic taste. It's not exactly high quality, but no one's complaining. The younger soldiers are huddled together, practicing simple dice games on a flattened patch of dirt. You notice one of them trying to cheat, slipping a weighted die into his palm. You decide not to say anything. After all, everyone's just trying to make life a little more bearable. As the fire crackles, conversation turns to a common topic: how new recruits are chosen. You listen with half an ear, knowing how the story goes. But it's still interesting to hear the older soldiers recount how they joined, each claiming that their recruitment was more grueling than anyone else's. Becoming a Roman soldier. The process of recruitment into the Roman legion is notoriously strict. To be eligible, you must be a Roman citizen, a privilege not easily earned. You also need to be physically fit, of sound mind, and ideally taller than average. Height doesn't make you braver, but it sure makes you more imposing on the battlefield. Once accepted, recruits are taken to training camps, where they're put through a brutal regime designed to transform farmers and craftsmen into disciplined warriors. Drills are relentless. The first thing you learn is how to march, because if you can't move as one with your unit, you're useless in battle. Hours are spent perfecting the short, efficient steps that make a Roman cohort resemble a single moving entity. You practice in full armor, carrying your shield, pilum, a type of spear, and gladius, a short sword. Complaining is not an option, unless you enjoy doing extra laps around the training ground. The trainers, usually hardened veterans themselves, bark instructions with a voice that could peel paint off a wall. They're not there to be your friends. They're there to make sure you don't collapse from exhaustion when it actually matters. Every move is drilled until it becomes muscle memory. Thrust, block, sidestep, repeat. But not everyone makes it through. Some recruits drop out, injured, broken, or simply unable to endure the grind. Those who persevere find themselves transformed, not just physically but mentally. You learn to put aside fear, focus on the rhythm of your training, and trust that your comrades will do the same. The honor of selection. Once basic training is complete, there's a chance, slim but present, that you might be selected for one of the elite units. Maybe a centurion notices your precision in drills, or perhaps you prove yourself unusually quick on your feet during a mock battle. Either way, it's not just skill but a mixture of luck and favor that lands you a place among the Praetorians or the Scouts. The Praetorian Guard, in particular, is something else entirely. It's not just about combat prowess, it's about loyalty. Being chosen means you're trustworthy enough to protect the emperor himself. For those chosen to become scouts or spies, it's more about cunning, intelligence, and the ability to blend into a crowd without being noticed. Not everyone is suited for these roles, and the training is more secretive, more dangerous. A test of endurance. One of the most dreaded training exercises is the cursus, a timed march carrying full gear over rugged terrain. Imagine yourself trudging over hills, your calves burning, lungs straining, and knowing that if you fall behind, the trainers will not hesitate to punish the entire unit for your failure. It's not just about proving your endurance. It's about proving that you won't let your fellow soldiers down. One night, one of the recruits from a neighboring cohort collapses during the drill. The centurion makes him get up and finish, dragging his armor along if necessary. It's harsh, but the message is clear. No weakness allowed. You can't help but feel a pang of pity, but you know better than to show it openly. Weakness is infectious, they say. A different kind of bond. After weeks of training, something unexpected happens. You start to feel a sense of belonging. The men you once saw as strangers now feel like brothers. You've all shared the same grueling drills, the same injuries, and the same victories, however small. On quiet nights like this one, around the campfire, the hardened exterior softens just a bit. Someone sings a rough, off-key tune from their hometown, and a few others join in, mumbling half-remembered lyrics. You smile, realizing that despite the hardships, despite the brutal training, there's something unbreakable forming here. When the next battle comes, you'll fight for Rome, sure, but more immediately, you'll fight for the men on either side of you. As the fire dwindles, one of the older soldiers tells a story about his first skirmish. How his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped his spear. A few of the younger recruits laugh, but there's no malice. Just relief in knowing that even the toughest-looking veterans were once just as scared as they are now. As sleep creeps in, you lean back against your pack, eyes tracing the stars above. The camp slowly quiets, save for the occasional murmur or the distant sound of a horse snorting in the makeshift stables. Tomorrow you'll march again. Tomorrow you might be tested. But for now, under the vast Roman sky, you let your mind drift, wondering if someday your own stories will be told around a campfire like this. Morning arrives with the clang of iron against iron, centurions rousing the camp from sleep. You roll out of your makeshift bed, muscles stiff from yesterday's march. The air is crisp, and a thin mist clings to the ground. You stuff the remainder of your bread into your mouth while fumbling with your armor straps. There's no time for anything more elaborate. Today the mood around camp is different. Rumors are swirling about a contingent of Praetorian Guards arriving. You've never seen them up close, only heard stories of their gleaming armor and their unwavering loyalty to the emperor. The Praetorians are more than just soldiers, they're legends. If the regular legionaries are the iron fist of Rome, the Praetorian Guard is its armored heart, the emperor's chosen. As midday approaches, you hear them before you see them. A rhythmic, unified clanking of armor, so perfectly synchronized that it sounds like one enormous war machine. Then they appear, marching in two columns. Their armor is more ornate than yours, polished to a blinding shine, with plumed helmets that sway in perfect unison. Each man moves with a quiet, almost unnatural precision. The Praetorian Guard wasn't just any group of soldiers, it was the emperor's personal bodyguard. Founded by Augustus, the first emperor, they were an elite force meant to protect Rome's ruler. Originally, they had been scattered throughout Italy, but soon enough, they became a concentrated power within the capital itself. It wasn't just their combat skill that made them formidable, it was their influence. One of the centurions mutters to you as they pass, careful around them. One wrong word, and you could be in the dungeons by nightfall. You glance over and catch the stare of one of the Praetorians, a gaze so cold and impassive it's like looking into the eyes of a statue. You quickly look away, focusing on tightening the straps of your boots. Guardians and kingmakers. The reality is that being a Praetorian is as much about politics as it is about warfare. These men live in close quarters with the emperor, guarding him not just from assassins, but from political rivals and power-hungry senators. They patrol the imperial palace, but they also gather intelligence and sometimes enforce the emperor's will with ruthless efficiency. Of course, power corrupts. Over the decades, the guard evolved from protectors to political players, sometimes deciding who would wear the imperial purple. Historians still argue whether they were Rome's saviors or its curse. They were instrumental in the rise and fall of several emperors. Caligula's murder, for instance, was orchestrated by his own guards. You can't help but wonder if these men feel loyalty to the emperor, or just to whoever ensures their continued power. A soldier's dream or nightmare. There's no doubt that being a Praetorian has its perks. Their pay is roughly 3 times that of an ordinary legionary, and they're stationed in Rome, not some remote outpost. Instead of mud-soaked tents, they have barracks in the city with access to baths, markets, and most importantly, status. Their families live in relative comfort, and after 16 years of service, They retire with a hefty pension. One of your comrades, a wiry man named Cato, whispers to you, "They live like kings. I'd give my right arm to join them." You glance at the parade of guards, their faces rigid and unfeeling, and can't help but wonder if the glamour is worth the constant threat of betrayal. Sure, they're respected, but they're also feared, even among their fellow soldiers. You hear stories about how one wrong move can end a Praetorian's career. Sometimes literally. One man supposedly winked at the emperor's favorite concubine during a procession. By nightfall he disappeared. Officially he was transferred, but the truth was whispered through clenched teeth, executed for disrespect. You make a mental note to keep your eyes fixed on the ground when they pass. Training to perfection. Becoming a Praetorian isn't just about looking impressive. Their training is even more intense than that of ordinary legionaries. They practice close quarters combat relentlessly, focusing on protecting the emperor at any cost. Some of their drills include forming a human shield wall around a single point, using their bodies as barriers to danger. Even their swords are slightly different, better balanced, crafted with precision. You overhear one of the Praetorians discussing the new recruits, and it's almost laughable how casually they speak about the selection process. They're looking for more than just strong fighters. They want men who can think on their feet, who can read a room as well as they can wield a sword. Intelligence and discretion are valued just as much as brute force. A brush with power. Later that day, while distributing rations, you accidentally bump into one of the Praetorians. The man doesn't move, but his hand twitches toward his gladius. You mumble an apology, heart pounding, but he barely acknowledges you. Instead, his eyes flicker past you as if scanning for threats, never truly focusing on your presence. You feel like a ghost, unseen and insignificant. Afterward, Cato jokes, "You nearly lost your head just for being clumsy." The others laugh nervously. Despite the jest, you know there's truth in it. A Praetorian's duty is to protect the emperor, even if that means dispatching perceived threats without hesitation. That evening, as the fires crackle and the camp settles, you can't help but think about the strange contradiction of the Praetorian life. On the one hand, they're symbols of Roman power and glory. On the other, they're haunted by paranoia, always watching, always aware that the next shift in power might turn them from bodyguards to targets. You lie back and stare at the night sky, imagining what it would feel like to walk those polished marble corridors in Rome, to know that your loyalty was to the emperor himself. Would it feel like pride or fear? Perhaps it's both. You close your eyes, listening to the distant clanking of armor as the Praetorians take their positions for the night watch. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hoots, a small reminder that while Rome's finest protectors are just men, the world outside remains as unpredictable as ever. Maybe tomorrow will bring more rumors about campaigns, rebellions, or even whispers of a new emperor. But for now, you let the fatigue of the day pull you into sleep, half dreaming of polished armor and the weight of power resting on a single well-trained shoulder. The morning sun filters through the canvas of your tent, casting thin beams of light that stretch across the dusty ground. You blink the sleep from your eyes and sit up, your joints protesting from the previous day's march. Outside, you hear the clatter of armor and the familiar bark of orders. Another day in the Legion begins. Today, however, is different. There's a tension in the air. News has come down the line that a skirmish is imminent. The Praetorians have already mobilized, their polished armor gleaming as they move with purpose. Your cohort is ordered to break camp and prepare for battle. You don't know much, just that a band of rebels has been spotted ahead, refusing Roman authority. As you strap on your armor, you catch sight of one of the Praetorians sharpening his gladius with a calm, almost indifferent expression. It's unsettling how composed they seem, as if battle is just another mundane task, like cleaning a shield or mending a cloak. You wonder if they ever feel fear or if years of training have erased that instinct entirely. The brutal efficiency of the elite. The Legion moves out, each unit falling into its precise place. You march alongside your comrades, but your eyes keep flickering toward the Praetorians at the front. Unlike the regular soldiers, they carry themselves differently, more upright, more deliberate. You realize that their presence alone is meant to intimidate, not just the enemy but anyone who dares challenge Roman authority. After hours of trudging through uneven terrain, you crest a hill and finally spot the enemy. A scraggly group of rebels, little more than farmers armed with makeshift weapons. Despite their ragged appearance, they seem resolute, standing in loose clusters across a narrow valley. Your centurion orders your cohort to form up, shields interlocked, spears ready. Then comes the order that makes your stomach tighten. The Praetorians will take the center, leading the charge. Regular legionaries will follow, ensuring that the line remains unbroken. You swallow hard, trying not to think about what lies ahead. The Praetorians in action. As the signal horn blares, the Praetorians advance at a steady pace. Their movements are almost surreal, deliberate and controlled, as if marching into a practice drill rather than combat. You follow, your feet automatically finding the rhythm, shield held high. When the two forces clash, the sound is deafening. Metal on metal, the grunt of effort, and the occasional scream. You catch glimpses of the Praetorians as they move, never hesitating, each strike precise and calculated. One of them deflects a wild swing with his shield before plunging his gladius into the attacker's abdomen. Another dispatches two rebels in quick succession, moving as if choreographed. You're too busy staying alive to fully appreciate their technique, but one thing becomes clear. These men don't just fight, they dismantle. Every motion serves a purpose. Every strike is lethal. You find yourself mimicking their movements, using your shield more as a weapon, thrusting forward rather than just blocking. It feels more dynamic, more efficient. The rebels falter, their formation crumbling under the relentless advance. One of them, younger than you, hesitates in front of a Praetorian. There's a pause, just a heartbeat's worth of mercy, and then the guard strikes him down without a second thought. You feel a pang of guilt, but there's no time to dwell on it. Victory, and the aftermath. The skirmish ends quickly. The rebels either flee or lie motionless on the ground. Your heart pounds in your chest as you lean on your spear, catching your breath. Around you, the Praetorians are already forming back into their precise columns, barely winded. You realize that while you're merely surviving, they're executing their duty with a kind of grim precision. One of the guards, his helmet slightly askew, pauses to wipe blood from his blade with a piece of cloth, then sheathes it with a practiced motion. He doesn't seem triumphant or relieved, just focused. You can't help but feel a mixture of admiration and unease. How do they compartmentalize like that? As you gather your thoughts, you notice one of the rebels crawling away, clutching his side. One of the Praetorians moves toward him, but before the man can plead, the guard delivers a swift, lethal blow. There's no cruelty in it, just efficiency. You feel your stomach churn, but you know this is how Rome maintains order. Mercy is a luxury the empire can't afford. The price of elite service. Later, back at camp, the mood is somber despite the victory. You catch a few murmurs from your fellow soldiers, whispers about how the Praetorians don't seem human, how they don't hesitate like regular men. You wonder whether it's the training or just a different mindset. One of the older legionaries shrugs, muttering, "You live in the Emperor's shadow long enough, you forget what it's like to be a normal soldier." That night, as the fires flicker, one of the Praetorians approaches your group, looking for a spare whetstone. You hand yours over cautiously. He nods, muttering a rare thank you, before moving on. It's the first time you've seen one of them interact with regular troops, and it strikes you that behind the polished armor and rigid posture, they're still just men, albeit molded into something almost mechanical. Survivors, not heroes. The next morning, you hear that the Praetorians have already moved on, back to the capital to resume their duties. You can't help but feel a strange emptiness, as if their presence had imposed a kind of order that's now missing. Cato scoffs, saying, "Good riddance. They give me the chills." But you're not so sure. There's something comforting about their ruthless efficiency, even if it's intimidating. One of the centurions gathers the remaining legionaries, reminding everyone that while the Praetorians get the glory, it's the regular soldiers who keep the empire's borders secure. You nod, but part of you can't help but wonder if being elite is worth the price. Later that night, as you lie staring up at the stars, you replay the skirmish in your mind. You think about the rebels' terrified face before that final blow, and how the Praetorians' expression never changed. Maybe that's what makes them so feared. Not their combat prowess, but their unwavering resolve. Eventually, sleep overtakes you, and your dreams are filled with the clash of swords, the gleam of polished armor, and the cold, unflinching eyes of Rome's chosen protectors. The next battle will come soon enough and you'll be ready, or as ready as any ordinary soldier can be. Days pass and the rhythm of military life reasserts itself. March, camp, drill, repeat. You slip back into routine, but the memory of the Praetorians lingers, how they fought without hesitation, like well-trained hunting dogs unleashed on command. The stories continue to ripple through the ranks, each one more embellished than the last. Someone claims they saw a Praetorian take down 3 rebels with a single strike. You doubt that, but you keep your thoughts to yourself. Then one evening, just as you're finishing a bowl of barley porridge, the centurion calls your name. You snap to attention, trying to remember if you've done anything wrong recently. He gestures for you to follow, leading you to a tent set apart from the rest. Inside, a man sits hunched over a map, tracing routes with his finger. He's older with a weathered face, but his eyes are sharp as a hawk's. This, the centurion says gruffly, is Decimus. He's a speculator. You're not sure whether to salute or stay silent, so you settle for something in between, a hesitant nod. Decimus barely glances up. The speculators and explorators, Rome's eyes and ears. Speculators, elite scouts and spies, are often overlooked compared to the Praetorians, but they're just as crucial to Rome's success. While the guards protect the emperor, speculators and their counterpart, the explorators, operate in the shadows, gathering information, scouting enemy territory, and sometimes even assassinating key targets. Unlike the Praetorians, they don't stand out. They dress like ordinary soldiers or even like locals, blending in wherever they go. Their strength isn't brute force but subtlety, cunning, and a willingness to bend or break the rules. Historians still argue whether the speculators' ruthless methods saved Rome from more uprisings than they caused. Decimus straightens up and finally looks at you. His gaze is intense, assessing, as if weighing your worth in a single glance. You know how to move quietly? He asks. You nod, not sure where this is going. Mission in the shadows. Decimus explains that a group of rebels is suspected of hiding in a nearby village. You'll accompany him and another scout to gather information. No armor, no Roman insignia, just simple tunics and cloaks. Your heart races, both excited and terrified. You've never been chosen for something this covert. That night, you slip out of camp under cover of darkness. Decimus leads the way, moving like a shadow through the underbrush. You do your best to mimic his steps, avoiding the dry leaves and brittle twigs that could give away your position. The other scout, a wiry man named Lucius, signals for you to stop, his ears twitching at the faintest sound. A distant howl maybe, or the rustle of nocturnal creatures. The village comes into view, barely a cluster of huts around a small well. You stay low, creeping closer. Decimus whispers, "Watch how they move." Rebels often keep to themselves. Look for signs of new arrivals, extra food, tense conversations. You nod, swallowing your nervousness. Peering through the thin reeds bordering the village, you notice a group of men gathered around a fire, speaking in hushed tones. One of them grips a sword, its hilt catching the firelight. Decimus taps your shoulder, and you inch closer, trying to catch fragments of their conversation. The risk of discovery. Just then a dog barks, sharp, insistent. Your heart leaps into your throat as one of the villagers turns your way, squinting into the darkness. You freeze, muscles tensed. Decimus signals for you to stay absolutely still. The man grumbles something to the dog and kicks it lightly, sending it scurrying away. You exhale, realizing you've been holding your breath. After an hour of observation, Decimus signals to retreat. You carefully backtrack, retracing your steps until you're safely out of earshot. Only then does Lucius crack a grin. "Not bad for your first outing," he mutters. You suppress a shaky laugh, grateful that your first scout mission didn't end in disaster. Skills of the speculators. Back at camp, Decimus gives you a few pointers. The trick is to notice everything without being noticed yourself, he says. Walk like you belong, even if you don't. And never make eye contact unless you want trouble. You nod, committing his words to memory. It's a different world from the brutal, straightforward combat of the legionaries. A world where a single misstep can mean capture or death. You find out later that the information you gathered was valuable. The rebels were indeed hiding there, and a cohort was sent the next day to round them up. It wasn't much of a fight, more of a quick, decisive sweep. You feel a strange pride in having played a part, even if your role was small. Masters of disguise. Over the next few weeks, you learn more about the speculators' methods. They use disguises, dyeing their hair, adopting regional dialects, and learning local customs. Some even carry fake documents, forged by skilled craftsmen back in Rome. When they're not in enemy territory, they blend into the legion itself, indistinguishable from any other soldier. You begin to understand why they seem almost invisible. They practice not being seen. Decimus shares a story about a mission gone wrong. How one of his men posed as a barbarian leader's servant, but got caught when he couldn't remember a local phrase. The punishment was swift, stripped, tortured, and displayed as a warning to Rome. You shiver, realizing that while the Praetorians deal with obvious threats, the scouts face danger hidden in plain sight. Tension in the ranks. Not all soldiers admire the speculators. Some see them as sneaky, untrustworthy. Cato scoffs when he hears you've been working with them. Spies, he mutters. Too slippery for real fighting. You don't bother arguing. Cato wouldn't understand the subtlety required. Besides, it's not like you've fully joined them. You're just learning, being useful where you can. That night, Decimus gives you a rare compliment. You're quieter than most, he says, clapping your shoulder. If you keep it up, you might have a future in this line of work. You feel a small surge of pride, but you're not sure if you want that life. It's one thing to fight in the open, another to move in the shadows. As you lie on your bedroll staring at the dark ceiling of your tent, you can't help but wonder. If being elite means leaving behind the camaraderie of the Legion to walk alone through enemy lands, is it really worth it? You can still feel the rush of creeping through the village, the thrill of being unseen, but also the cold awareness that one mistake could mean the end. Sleep finally claims you, dreams swirling with shadows and whispers, where nothing is what it seems, and every step must be calculated. Maybe that's why the scouts keep to themselves. When you live in the dark, daylight becomes almost too harsh to face. The days slip by in a familiar rhythm: march, drill, set up camp. Your brief stint with the speculators feels like a distant memory, but every now and then, you catch Decimus watching you during training, his sharp eyes evaluating whether you've retained the skills he taught you. You're still an ordinary legionary, but you move a little quieter now, more aware of your surroundings. One evening, as the sun dips behind the hills, you gather around the campfire with the rest of your cohort. Tonight, the talk is lighter: stories of home, exaggerated tales of past battles, and the occasional off-key song. Cato is carving a small wooden figure, grumbling that it's supposed to look like a horse but resembles more of a lumpy dog. You're laughing at his frustration when a centurion strides over, ordering everyone to quiet down. Life behind the lines. Tonight, instead of preparing for battle, your unit is tasked with guard duty at the camp perimeter. Not exactly glamorous but crucial nonetheless. You take your position at one of the makeshift watchtowers, essentially a wooden platform with a decent view of the surrounding plain. The night air is cool, and the sounds of the camp gradually fade into the background, replaced by the soft hum of insects and the occasional rustle of wine through the dry grass. Guard duty is where thoughts creep in. You catch yourself daydreaming about what life might be like if you make it back to Rome. Maybe open a small tavern, tell stories of your exploits to anyone willing to buy you a drink. But a sudden noise snaps you back to reality. A twig snapping somewhere in the dark. You grip your spear, squinting into the gloom, but it's just a stray goat, wandering too close to camp. You exhale, realizing how tense you've become. Camaraderie in the ranks. As dawn creeps over the horizon, you're relieved by the next shift. You shuffle back to your tent, grateful to peel off your helmet and stretch your aching neck. Breakfast is the usual: stale bread, a thin soup of lentils, and a sliver of dried meat. Cato plops down beside you, complaining about the snoring from the next tent over. Sounds like a dying bear, he mutters, to the laughter of a few nearby soldiers. These quiet moments remind you that the Legion isn't just about fighting. It's about surviving the in-between too: the boredom, the routine, and the way small jokes keep morale afloat. One of the older legionaries, Brutus, shares a story from his early days. A prank where someone swapped out a centurion's helmet plume with a bundle of straw. You can't help but laugh at the thought of the usually stern officer marching around without noticing. Rituals and superstitions. When the talk dies down, a few soldiers gather to play dice, while others share small trinkets from home. A carved amulet, a faded cloth with family crests. You notice one soldier carefully polishing a small statue of Mars, the god of war, muttering a quiet prayer for protection. Superstition runs deep in the Legion, and it's not uncommon to see men rubbing lucky charms or whispering to their weapons before battle. Cato pulls out a worn set of dice, challenging you to a quick game. You're wary. Last time he played, he somehow ended up with more coins than he started with, despite claiming terrible luck. As expected, he wins the first few rounds, smirking triumphantly. You're convinced the dice are weighted, but it's harmless enough. Just another way to pass the time. Making camp. A precision operation. When the signal to break camp comes, everyone moves with the practiced efficiency that only repetition can create. Tents are folded, supplies packed, and the entire area is swept to leave no trace. Roman camps are built to a specific blueprint, with roads running in straight lines and designated zones for cooking, sleeping, and training. Historians still debate whether the Roman military's success was due more to its disciplined troops or its impeccable logistics. After all, it's one thing to win a battle. It's another to maintain an empire across vast and hostile lands. You're proud of how the Legion moves like a giant synchronized organism. It's reassuring to know that wherever you are, the camp will always look the same, orderly and efficient. Once packed, the march begins again. The terrain changes from grassy plains to rocky hills, and your legs ache from the constant uphill slog. You try not to think about it, focusing instead on keeping your shield from chafing your arm. A younger recruit stumbles and you reach out to steady him, just as someone did for you not so long ago. Food and downtime. At the next rest stop, the camp bustles with small fires and the smell of lentil stew. You and Cato take turns stirring the pot, adding a few precious herbs you manage to trade with a passing merchant. Food in the Legion is simple but hearty: grains, dried meat, legumes. If you're lucky, there might be cheese or even some fruit, but usually it's the same monotonous fare. One soldier, Marcus, pulls out a tin flute and starts playing a low, haunting tune. It's surprisingly good, and the melody weaves through the camp like a gentle breeze. You close your eyes, letting the music dull the edge of homesickness. Test of loyalty. Just as the mood begins to lighten, a messenger arrives, calling for your centurion. Whispers spread, something about an inspection. The news sends a ripple of anxiety through the camp. Inspections mean more than just checking gear. They're a test of discipline. You hear that a tribune, one of the higher officers, is traveling with the Praetorians, assessing the condition of the troops. You line up as ordered, armor gleaming as best you can manage. When the tribune arrives, his expression is unreadable, eyes darting over your ranks. One of the Praetorians flanks him, as rigid as a statue. The tribune stops in front of your line, frowning at a soldier whose belt is slightly crooked. The poor man corrects it hastily, cheeks flushing red. The tribune doesn't say much, just a few clipped words of approval. As he moves on, you relax slightly, grateful that your kit passed inspection. When the tension finally breaks, someone cracks a joke about the tribune's immaculate hair, and laughter ripples through the ranks. Even the most disciplined soldiers can't help but chuckle when the stress lifts. The small moments. That evening, as the sun sets, you sit with Cato, polishing your gladius. The blade catches the fading light, and you think about how these small tasks ground you. You've survived battles and skirmishes, but it's in these quiet moments that you feel most like yourself. A soldier, yes, but also just a man trying to get by. You wonder what tomorrow will bring. More marching, probably. Maybe another skirmish. Whatever it is, you'll face it as you always do, with a quick joke, a helping hand, and the resolve to keep moving forward. As the camp settles into sleep, the night air cools your face, and you finally let your guard down. The stars above glimmer faintly, unbothered by the worries of men. Slowly your thoughts drift and sleep takes hold. You dream of marching through fields of gold, your armor lighter than ever, and a sense of calm that only exists in dreams. Tomorrow will come soon enough, but for now, you let the peace of the night wash over you. You trudge back into the gritty world of the Roman Legion, but this time your boots sink deep into the soil of discipline, punishment, and loyalty. The very foundation that held the elite forces together like the iron links of their famed chainmail. It's not just about muscle or weapon skill here. It's about how they forged unbreakable commitment in a world that would chew up and spit out the faint-hearted faster than you can say testudo. And trust me, if you thought your last work review was harsh, the consequences in the Roman Legion make that look like a participation trophy ceremony. The first thing you notice is the sheer rigor of their discipline. These legionnaires operated under what we'd now call a zero-tolerance policy for slackers. Every man had to be ready to march, fight, and die on command, no questions asked. Failure was not an option because in the chaos of battle, hesitation meant death. Not just for the soldier but for the entire cohort. To keep this brutal machine running smoothly, the legions used a system of punishment that might make you squirm in your bed, though ironically, it also ensured you'd fall asleep faster, if only from sheer exhaustion and dread. A mainstream fact here. Roman discipline was famously strict. For example, the practice of decimation, a word that still echoes with terror in military history, meant that if a unit showed cowardice or mutinied, 1 in every 10 men would be executed by their own comrades. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine your squad having to pick the unlucky 10 to serve as a grim warning. Not the kind of team-building exercise you want to bring up on a first date. But it wasn't just death penalties. Lesser infractions resulted in beating, demotion, or humiliating punishments like carrying heavy packs for miles or standing for hours in the sun. And here's a fringe tidbit to make you wonder about the Roman sense of irony. Legionnaires who were caught stealing from the army's supplies sometimes had their hands branded or were forced to march with their right hands tied behind their backs. A literal hands-off warning for future larceny, you might say. The culture of loyalty went beyond fear of punishment. The legions fides, a complex Roman ideal combining loyalty, trust, and faithfulness, was drilled into every recruit from day one. You weren't just fighting for yourself. You were fighting for the gens, your family, your century, your squad, and above all, Rome itself. The bond was so tight that historians still argue whether the legion's discipline was driven more by love of country or sheer terror of the whip. Some say the brutal punishments bred only resentment, while others believe that fear forged stronger camaraderie. Either way, you'd better believe that the men would stand shoulder to shoulder, ready to die for their unit and their emperor. This loyalty was not blind, though. Elite legionnaires often swore oaths that were as much spiritual as practical, pledging their lives to the emperor and the republic. Some units even had secret rituals to deepen that bond, like sharing sacred meals or wearing matching tokens that symbolized their brotherhood. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of matching friendship bracelets, but with a lot more at stake than just weekend plans. You might be surprised to learn that desertion wasn't just frowned upon. It was punishable by death or, at best, exile from Roman society. And given how hard it was to survive outside the legion's protective structure, this was practically a death sentence anyway. But this harsh reality also meant that loyalty was carefully nurtured, not just enforced. Commanders rewarded brave acts with promotions, land, and even citizenship for non-Romans. So, in a way, the system balanced the carrot and the stick, though the stick was definitely the bigger, pointier one. And here comes a modern aside. Think of the elite Roman legionnaires as the ultimate workplace MVPs, except instead of bonus checks, they got shiny helmets and a decent chance at surviving a war zone. Not exactly the kind of job with flexible hours or a health plan. Historians still argue whether the extreme discipline actually made the legions more effective, or if it simply masked deeper morale issues. Some sources suggest that the fear of punishment sometimes led to mutinies or breakdowns in command, especially during long, grueling campaigns. But there's no denying that the discipline and loyalty of the elite forces gave Rome a military backbone stronger than most ancient powers could boast. Oh, and remember that weird crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Turns out some legionnaires might have used bizarre remedies and potions to toughen themselves mentally against the pain and fear of punishment. Ancient stress management, if you will. Superstitions and rituals like carrying lucky charms or performing odd pre-battle dances also helped keep morale high despite the harsh conditions. So as you sink deeper into your pillow, imagine standing in the middle of a dusty Roman camp, the sun beating down on your armor, the crack of the centurion's whip in the air, and the knowledge that your comrades' lives depend as much on your obedience as on your sword. That tightrope of discipline and loyalty was no joke. It was what separated the elite from the ordinary, and what turned a ragtag group of recruits into the most feared soldiers in history. You don't get much quieter than the strange rituals and customs that seeped into the Roman legion's daily grind. Those little oddities that sound more like a weird reality show than a disciplined army. The elite legions, wrapped up in their own mystique, weren't just about rigid formations and sharp swords. They had quirks that ranged from the superstitious to the downright bizarre, adding a pinch of humanity, and maybe a dash of madness, to their hard-as-steel reputation. One mainstream fact to start. Roman soldiers often carried phylacteries, small amulets or charms believed to bring luck and protection. These weren't just for show. Whether it was a carved bone, a piece of pottery, or a coin stamped with a god's face, these talismans were taken seriously. Superstition in war isn't exactly a surprise. You wouldn't want to rely only on your armor when the gods might be watching, right? But the quirks don't stop there. Some elite legionnaires reportedly practiced odd habits to keep their edge. One fringe tidbit suggests they might have chewed on a mix of crushed herbs and, yes, sometimes even narcotics to dull pain or sharpen focus. Imagine you're about to storm a fort, and instead of a Red Bull, you're popping whatever ancient herbal gum the medic handed you. Hard to imagine a legionnaire setting up a coffee cart at the camp anytime soon. Even stranger, legionaries participated in rituals that bordered on the theatrical. Before battle, it's said some units performed chants or dances to scare off evil spirits or boost morale. Think less marching band, more ghostly flash mob. These actions weren't just superstition. They served as a psychological tool, getting the soldiers into a collective mindset where fear was pushed aside by ritual and routine. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely believed to influence fate, or if they were more about creating a shared identity and unity among soldiers. You might think it's a stretch to credit a champ with winning a battle, but when thousands of men act in unison, belief or no belief, that kind of group energy can be terrifyingly effective. Speaking of rituals, there were also some bizarre punishments that doubled as rituals. For example, soldiers guilty of certain offenses might be forced to wear a tunica molesta, a tunic soaked in flammable material and set alight. Not exactly a fire drill you'd want to sign up for. While this was rare and reserved for extreme cases, it highlights just how dramatic discipline could get. Quirky customs extended into legionnaire hygiene as well. Baths were crucial, but not in the way you might expect. The Romans famously used strigils, curved metal tools, to scrape off dirt and sweat instead of soap, and some soldiers were rumored to smear mixtures of animal fats and ashes on their skin, not just as sunscreen, but as a form of protective grease. The idea was to keep skin tough and resistant to cuts and bites, though it probably smelled less like a spa and more like a farmyard. Oh, and remember the earlier mention of crocodile dung sunscreen? That's just one example of the Romans' bizarre skincare hacks. They truly experimented with anything that promised protection or healing, no matter how icky it sounded. Among the elite, there were also odd eating habits. Soldiers often consumed pasca, a sour vinegar drink mixed with water. While it sounds unpleasant, it was a cheap and safe alternative to often contaminated water. And for snacks? Think dried meats, hard bread, and sometimes insects. Yeah, insects. Not the gourmet diet you'd expect from an elite force, but hey, hunger doesn't discriminate. One particularly quirky practice was how some units marked their victories or significant events with graffiti. Far from the polished inscriptions on monuments, these were crude, often humorous sketches scratched into walls or tents. Some depict soldiers teasing their comrades or drawing caricatures of officers. Ancient Roman roast sessions, if you will. Historians still argue whether these offbeat habits were essential morale boosters, or just leftover superstitions clinging to a fading pagan world. Were they comforting rituals or just signs of ancient stress? Either way, they remind you that beneath the disciplined armor, these soldiers were as human and weird as any of us. So as you pull your blanket a little tighter, picture those legionnaires, smeared in grease and clutching their lucky charms, humming a chant before the chaos, their odd little customs threading through the vast machinery of war. It's these strange human touches that make their story less of a dusty history lesson and more of a quietly fascinating tale to drift off with tonight. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down as you step into the world of historians' mysteries and debates surrounding the Roman legions, especially those elite special forces you've been trailing like shadows in the dust. The more you peel back the layers of scrolls and artifacts, the more you realize that much of what you thought you knew is actually cloaked in rumor, guesswork, and passionate scholarly disagreements that have raged for decades. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and some pieces that don't quite belong. A solid mainstream fact to anchor you. While the legion's overall structure and many campaigns are well documented, details about the elite units, like the Speculatores, Explorators, or Frumentarii, remain elusive, with ancient sources often vague or contradictory. These units operated in secrecy, so their real numbers, missions, and even their organization remain partly in the realm of speculation. One fringe tidbit that's fascinated historians is the debate about the infamous fermentarii. Originally grain collectors and logistics officers, they morphed over time into something closer to secret police or spies within the empire. Some scholars argue they were ruthless enforcers of imperial will, while others suggest their influence and role are exaggerated, possibly conflated with later imperial practices. You can almost hear the whispers of ancient informants slipping through the shadows. The line between myth and reality blurs dramatically when it comes to elite legionnaires' supposed superhuman skills. Some ancient accounts describe them performing feats that sound straight out of a fantasy novel, leaping across enemy lines, dispatching dozens with a single stroke, or even predicting the enemy's moves like a chess grandmaster. Historians still argue whether these stories were propaganda to boost morale or exaggerations born from admiration and fear. Another hot debate centers on how elite these forces really were compared to the average legionary. Did they train harder, fight better, and live longer? Or were they just the best picks from an already formidable group, elevated mostly for propaganda purposes? Some recent archaeological finds suggest the material culture of these elite soldiers was not as luxurious or distinct as once thought, challenging the idea of a clear-cut special forces elite. There's also the matter of discipline and punishment we touched on earlier. Scholars are divided on how effective extreme measures like decimation really were. Some argue such harshness maintained order and deterred cowardice. Others believe it caused fear and resentment, leading to more problems than solutions. It's a reminder that even the best armies can struggle with human nature. One of the most intriguing mysteries is the role of women in the legions. Officially, the legions were male-only, but grave finds and inscriptions hint that women sometimes accompanied or supported the troops in unofficial capacities, whether as camp followers, nurses, or even fighters disguised as men. Historians still debate the extent and impact of these women on legion life and campaigns. And remember that quirky custom about soldiers drawing graffiti on walls? Recent research suggests these sketches and writings might offer genuine insights into daily legion life, attitudes, and even hidden dissent, challenging the idea that Roman soldiers were all disciplined, unquestioning drones. The influence of religion and magic is another contentious point. Some experts argue that the legion's reliance on omens, sacrifices, and rituals wasn't just superstition, but a fundamental part of their psychological warfare and cohesion. Others see these as symbolic gestures with limited practical impact. As you let these questions swirl around your mind, it's clear that the Roman elite forces remain partly shrouded in mystery, their true nature slipping through the cracks of history like dust through your fingers. This very uncertainty keeps their story alive, inviting you to wonder, imagine, and maybe even doubt everything you think you know. So as your eyelids grow heavier, think of those ancient soldiers not as perfect machines but as real people caught between myth and history, their secrets locked away in the shadows of time, waiting for you to quietly explore. You're almost at the end of this dusty journey, and now you trace the lingering echoes of the Roman elite forces into the modern world, the shadows cast by their shields stretching all the way to today's special operations units. It's fascinating to see how the brutal, disciplined, and cunning legions didn't just disappear with the fall of the empire, but left a blueprint for what would become the ultimate warriors of modern militaries. First, the straightforward fact. Many military historians credit Roman legions with laying foundational principles for organized, disciplined, and specialized forces. The emphasis on training, unit cohesion, and tactical innovation clearly inspired later armies, from medieval knights to contemporary special forces. The legion's ability to adapt and incorporate new tactics remains a benchmark. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some modern special forces units, like the Italian Kalmoschian or British SAS, trace their lineage and traditions back to the Roman legions, even adopting certain symbols or mottos reminiscent of ancient Rome. Imagine a special ops soldier joking that their unit's ancestor was a guy in sandals with a gladius. Not the usual origin story, but it shows how powerful historical identity can be. Yet, historians still argue how direct or meaningful these connections truly are. Is the Roman legion a distant inspiration, or just a romanticized ancestor in military folklore? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Military culture loves a good origin myth, and Rome's legions offer a rich source. Technically, The elite legionnaires' training methods and tactical formations have echoes in today's drills and combat strategies. The famous testudo formation, with soldiers locking shields into an impenetrable shell, for instance, is studied for its discipline and protection principles. It's hard not to admire how an ancient tactic still fascinates modern tacticians. But the influence goes beyond battle. The Roman system of ranks, strict discipline, and chain of command resembles the rigid hierarchy seen in modern militaries. Some argue that without Rome's legions setting these standards, the idea of professional standing armies might have taken much longer to evolve. On the fringe side, there are military enthusiasts and reenactors who go as far as replicating Roman legion training and tactics to see how effective they really were. They find that some ancient drills were tougher and more exhausting than expected, while others, like the use of certain weapons or armor types, might have been less practical than romantic history suggests. And of course, pop culture loves to keep the Roman legion myth alive, from movies to video games, sometimes blurring facts with fiction. But the core idea remains. Rome's elite soldiers represent a timeless ideal of discipline, loyalty, and tactical genius, qualities that continue to inspire warriors centuries later. As you lay back, your mind tracing those invisible lines from ancient battlefields to modern training grounds, you sense how history breathes quietly beneath the surface of today's world. The Roman legions might be long gone, but their spirit, rough, relentless, and remarkably effective, lives on in the shadows where modern soldiers train, plan, and prepare. So let your thoughts drift with the legacy of those elite legionnaires, their lessons carried forward across millennia, whispering to every soldier who's ever worn a uniform or gripped a weapon in the name of loyalty, discipline, and brotherhood.